What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Jimmy Watkins, columnist, cleveland.com. And today is the game against the San Antonio Spurs. We know the Cavs are now back on a 2-game win streak. Jimmy, if you want to put it that way, they're out of their losing streak, and they are trying to figure out how they're going to end the season. Obviously, there's the 67 games that is still in play. They also understand that they really don't have to worry about wins and losses at this point in the season. So I wanted to get into a couple of questions from our subtexters, but the one that stood out the most to me, and we've talked about this a couple of times on this podcast, but Daniel in Seattle says, is Kenny purposely experimenting with lineups to gather data for the playoffs? And the quick answer is yes, right? Because we understand that DeAndre Hunter, Ty Jerome, Dean Wade, Sam Merrill got thrown into the starting lineup. These are guys, role players that get to play in different lineups with different matchups depending on who the Cavs get matched up with in the first round, second round. And I think that's really interesting on how this Cavs team has gone about this season. When you talk about how important it is for Kenny Atkinson to get data surrounding where this Cavs team is at. But I think the most important aspect of it that they're still not doing is getting DeAndre Hunter minutes alongside the core four. Obviously, for the San Antonio Spurs game, that won't be possible at full because Evan Mobley is going to be resting. Jimmy, I also just wanted to walk you through the playoff picture before getting into this because of where the standings are entering today. The first seed, if everything were to work out how it was today, and the first seed is the Cleveland Cavaliers, the 8th seed would be the Orlando Magic. Then they would have to figure out who they play between the 4th seed and the 5th seed, which was the Indiana Pacers and the Detroit Pistons. And I think that would be a great series. And the 3rd and the 6th seed is the New York Knicks and the Milwaukee Bucks. And I really do think that would also be a great series. How it's currently constructed, I think this would be my ideal bracket for how the playoffs would shake out. What do you think about how the Cavs are maintaining and deciding between lineups to figure out where they're going to go in the playoffs? And what do you also think about the playoff bracket as it stands and how the storylines could hit a little bit different when you look about how deep dive we can go with these different games?
So the bracket looks pretty tasty right now as it stands. I mean, if you're the Cavs, you're rooting for Detroit in that Indiana series. I think both because you want to show JB Bickerstaff how much you've grown in the last year, let's put it that way. And because the Detroit Pistons on offense are Cade Cunningham, somebody shoots a 3 or bust, essentially. I mean, in terms of shot creation, it's kind of Cade Cunningham or bust. That's a much more manageable offense to defend than the Pacers, who are helter-skelter, running up and down, shooting all these threes, all these different creators on the core. We've talked about them as sort of like a sneaky playoff villain in this Cavs run potentially. I would probably pick them against the Pacers, to be frank, although Cade Cunningham is probably the best player in that series at this point. So that's interesting. The Orlando Magic, and that's just a perfect narrative matchup. Again, how far have you come in the last year? Well, let's give you the same exact team that you played in the playoffs last year. Granted, that team is not the same without Jalen Suggs, who they're not going to have in that matchup, but still, it's going to be a similar kind of series, and I think the Cavs are way, way, way better suited to handle that kind of, because last year we're talking rock fights back and forth. This time we saw, obviously, the Magic is the team, when you get these teams who have like singular nicknames, I don't know how to refer to them. Is our Thunder, is our, I don't know, English grammar silliness. We just saw them kick off the Cavs' longest losing streak, 4 games of the season, a couple weeks ago. So we know they can still drag the Cavs down in the mud a little bit. Granted, no Evan Mobley in that game either. But I think over the course of 7 games, the Cavs offense would just overwhelm Orlando. As good as Orlando's defense is, the Cavs are going to have a couple games where they make a bunch of threes and Orlando's not going to be able to keep up with them. And that's going to crush their spirit, frankly. So the narrative arcs, and again, if you get Magic, Pistons, probably the two teams that I think that's the best possible path for the Cavs to make the conference finals. I think both of those are pretty short series, to be frank with you. In terms of what Kenny's doing, I mean, Kenny, we've been saying for weeks and honestly months since the Cavs started out at their crazy win pace that Kenny's going to have a lot of time to get in the lab. He started talking about it in frickin' January that, like, yeah, we're going to be rolling stuff out just to see what happens, especially after they acquired DeAndre Hunter. We have a new player, really a new impactful player. We want to see how he fits with all these different groupings. That's been happening for a while now. This is the doldrums of the season, so maybe we're seeing a little bit more. We're also like seeing, Darius is resting one night, Donovan's resting another night, Evan's resting tonight. When you have those situations, you kind of have to throw some unfamiliar lineups out there just because you have normal core pieces of your rotation that aren't out there. What I would say generally about this, because I think it's like with March Madness and the lead up to the NBA playoffs, the general public, the let's call it the casual viewing audience, most people, I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast have been watching the Cavs since October. Kudos to you, ball lovers, one of us, let's say. To those who haven't been, who are wondering, like, where's this 70 win pace team that everyone's been talking about? You picked a bad time to join the Ricardo ride, honestly. Because it's time to rest guys. Pretty clear, we'll talk about this more in a bit, but pretty clear Donovan's groin's been bothering him here for a little bit, so he's not the same guy that he's been for a lot of the year. And the Cavs have such an overwhelming, like, if everyone's healthy and firing on all cylinders, then I think there would be no issue with, keep trying to do what you've been doing, play everyone 30 minutes and put on a show here late in the season, close strong, as close as strong as you started. But that's not the case right now. I think the Cavs are feeling a little bit of the wear and tear of the regular season right now. And I would just like to say to the people who are kind of just now dipping their toe into the basketball waters, this stuff super doesn't matter. I think Kenny, after all of those 4 losses, wanted to come up to the mic and be like, I don't care. We've won. We have been the best team in the NBA for 80%, 90% of the season to this point. They are now jockeying with the Thunder for that distinction, but they have the top seed in their conference. They could lose as long as they get the 1 seed. They have exceeded every expectation that people had for them to start this season, and they are bona fide contenders. Pretty much nothing besides an injury, everyone knock on wood together, can change that over the next couple of weeks we have until the playoffs. So take everything you're seeing with a grain of salt. Watch them, because on their best night, like you saw it in the second half against the Utah Jazz, man, they are fun to watch when they're rolling. They are a machine. They play basketball, quote unquote, the right way, balls moving, bodies moving, and they got the talent. They're awesome. So just focus on that stuff. Don't focus on these weird bumps in the road that we're having at a very weird point in the season. The Cavs are going to be fine.
And I think, obviously, because Evan Mobley's out, they're going to have to mess with the rotations and all these things. And obviously, I think with Evan being out instead of Donovan being out, Kenny Atkinson is more viable to probably put DeAndre or Dean Wade or Isaac Okoro into the starting lineup for tonight's game. I would imagine he leads DeAndre Hunter just to get his minutes a little bit higher. But I think it's also important to note that Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox are not playing in this contest tonight because of injuries that will sideline them for the remainder of the season. So we understand that there's definitely things that are behind the scenes that are going to impact how Kenny Atkinson not only goes about his roster and rotation construction for each matchup, but also how that impacts how the guys are going to be able to play and what competition level they're going up against. Sure, Darius and Donovan are still going to have to deal with Devin Vassell and Stephon Castle. Obviously, Stephon Castle is one of the guys that is vying for a Rookie of the Year candidacy, but I definitely think it's a different level than having Victor Wembanyama roaming the painted area and like, okay, so this is basically cut off from here to here. We just know that we're going to struggle here. And De'Aaron Fox is obviously one of the fastest guards in the league. And obviously Darius is up there as well. But I think Fox is up there maybe to a different standard still. But I wanted to get into the next question, which I know you wrote about this today, Jimmy, so I'm going to let you expand on it a little bit more. But from Dave from PA, he says, at this point, Ty Jerome is basically a poor man's Manu Ginobili. He's a great finisher and shooter with just enough chaos to keep the other team off balance. And he gives you solid ball handling and serviceable defense. He'll easily be worth whatever contract the Cavs can give him. So, Jimmy, what do you think of the Manu Ginobili comparison? And what do you think about his candidacy and Ty Jerome's candidacy for most improved and for sixth man of the year? Because we know that those odds have fluctuated this season. All eyes have been on Peyton Pritchard. Then you throw DeAndre Hunter into the mix, who likely will take votes from Ty Jerome. I know you wrote about all of this for cleveland.com this morning. Go subscribe to check out Jimmy's work because it was a great article this morning. Jimmy, what do you got?
Comparing to Manu is so hard because he's kind of one of one. He was such a funky player. He's also, Manu was a little bit better. The thing that continues to blow my mind about Ty Jerome is how efficient he is with as infrequently as he gets all the way to the rim. Usually you get he's a great shooter. 3-point, when you're talking about the effective field goal percentage, true shooting, all these advanced stats, they put weight towards the 3-pointer being worth more than 2. Okay. So that you shoot a bunch of threes, you shoot a high percentage from 3, it's going to help your overall efficiency numbers. But it's just like Ty Jerome is shooting so many, it's basically threes and floaters. That's the majority of his shot diet. He does great glass work closer to the rim, but even then he's not quite getting all the way to the rim. So he's just, in that regard, I think Manu was a little bit more of a guy who put pressure on the rim, whereas Ty puts pressure right outside the restricted area, right? Which is still valuable because then you're making big men make decisions about, okay, is this going to be a floater? Is this going to be a lob? That sort of stuff. So I don't know, because he's a 6-man, anytime we get a good 6-man, I feel like people go with the Manu comp. But I think Ty and Manu are a little bit different. Ty's more, the way Ty manipulates pace is so impressive to me. He, one of those guys, the old basketball saying, "Oh, you can't speed him up. Can't speed him up." Some of these guys who don't have the explosive first step in the NBA, they get a little antsy when guys put ball pressure on because they feel like they have to go faster, and that leads to turnovers and bad decisions. Ty's just like, okay, man, cool. Like I'm gonna walk you down, use my size, change directions here, and I'm gonna shoot another gorgeous floater for 2 points, or you're gonna foul me. But I think it's been interesting the way we've talked about Ty in the awards conversation this year, because he's an incredible bench player. He's when I looked it up, he's one of 7 guys in the NBA averaging off the bench double-digit points per game on 50% shooting. Peyton Pritchard, by the way, not in that category. He's shooting like 48%. Peyton Pritchard's awesome. I'm just saying it's still the efficiency. Ty is a notch above. But I just feel like we've been pushing Ty for the wrong award all year, because I think most improved player, he is the picture of what that award is supposed to be. Let's refresh. This is a guy who, before this season, had been on 4 teams in 5 years. He had essentially the one season he ever had double-digit scoring per game was on like a 24-win Oklahoma City Thunder team. That was the stakes are so different when you're playing for this Cavs team versus that Thunder team. And he had never been this efficient before. He had never played this many games before. He was injured a lot, and he would tell you, he has told us that this Ty Jerome was always in there. He just didn't get the opportunities, both because of his injuries and because of the teams he was on. He didn't get the chances. Okay, fine. But now, and that's part of the problem with most improved sometimes, is that we falsely equivocate increased opportunity with improvement. And maybe there is a little bit of that happening with Ty here. But the thing to me, I did the research. The thing to me, I just feel like we've lost what that award means. So this award began in 1985-86, I believe they gave it out for the first time. 18 of the first 29 winners of this award were given to players who were drafted 16th or later in the NBA draft. The idea, I feel like the spirit of this award has always been, this is a guy who really had to grind to carve out this impressive season for himself in the NBA. So it's about the celebrating the successes of player development, the guys who we didn't see coming, right? Last 10 years, 8 of the winners of this award have been former lottery picks, and their average age has been under 24 years old. So essentially, it's going to happen again this year, by the way. Cade Cunningham's going to win this award. He's like a 2-1 favorite in most betting circles. But he's a 23-year-old former first overall pick. Like, when Cade Cunningham got drafted, everyone was like, yeah, this guy's probably going to be an all-star by his 4th year. Guess what? He was an all-star in his 4th year. So I just feel like while Cade Cunningham has made a huge stride this year, part of that is because the Pistons have surrounded him with spacing, NBA spacing, for one of the first times in his life. That's a novel concept. I think JB Bickerstaff deserves credit for injecting new culture into a Pistons franchise that really needed it too. Just hat tip to JB. But it's like, how long are we going to keep doing this? They say, and this is the counter argument, they say in basketball circles that last jump from very good to potentially great player is the hardest one to make when you're at the top of the scouting report, as Cade is, and you're still producing, and he's averaging career high in points per game on the best efficiency of his career. I get all that. I just feel like we've kind of lost the plot with most improved player when we're ready. There's 2-3 weeks left in the season. We're just ready to hand it to the former number 1 overall pick who's cashing in his potential. And the guy who came off of the fringes of nowhere into creating a role for himself on one of the deepest teams in the league, Ty Jerome is one of the most important players on one of the NBA's best teams. And you can't even find him on any of the lists. That's the thing. It's not just that Ty Jerome's not going to win this award, which he's certainly not going to. He's not even on the short list of conversations. And as much as you want to say some of this is more opportunity for Ty and staying healthier and all that stuff, I just feel like Cade Cunningham is developing naturally, whereas Ty Jerome has spiked in a way that we don't see very often. And that is the crux of most improved player, in my opinion.
I mean, Jimmy, I think the best point that we can make is, and this is my take on the situation, if you're a number 1 overall pick, you cannot be most improved. Like, there is an expectation for you coming into the league where if you don't produce, there's so much scrutiny on you. And obviously we also have this timeline, as you mentioned, for Cade Cunningham to get to where he's already at. So there's a natural development that was expected of Cade, and surely he's taken it to a different level this season and will be in conversation for all NBA teams rather than just an all-star. But I think when you talk about those dynamics and the difference in Ty Jerome having to fight his way onto an NBA team and then fight his way into different contracts, that's completely different than being the franchise guy as soon as you step into the NBA and saying, okay, we're going to give you some time, but if this don't work out in the next 5 years, this is going to be ugly because you're going to be considered one of those guys that didn't work out. That was a number 1 overall pick. And I just think Ty is definitely supposed to be in these conversations. And it's funny that he's in 2 award conversations, but still isn't getting the same kind of coverage or recognition in these awards.
The 6-man. He's not in this conversation. He's not in the most improved conversation. That's why I wrote this, because it's crazy to me. And the other thing I want to say, I'm glad you mentioned that Cade's going to get all NBA. And he should. He probably is going to get like second team. he's probably going to get like second team All NBA. I mean, JB went on I think JB was, I saw him like talking about first team All NBA last year, and he was basically saying, well, if you can't see that, then like, what are we doing here? Like that's how the Pistons, of course, the Pistons are going to see it that way, but like, I don't think it's crazy to weigh him for that. He's been so good this year. But what I want to like, again, why was the award created? Because guys like Cade Cunningham are going to get rewarded anyways. It's already happened. Before the season, Cade Cunningham signed a $225 million max rookie extension. Weird. How did the Pistons know he'd be worth that? Did they see his most improved season coming? Or maybe he was just always good, and then they put better players around him that suited his strengths, and now you're seeing a more efficient Cade Cunningham. I don't know. He's an all-star. He's already gotten a massive contract. He's going to be all NBA. We already have the pieces in place to recognize Cade Cunningham's season. A season and the story behind it, like Ty Jerome's, also deserves to be recognized by history, and it's not going to be because, frankly, no one cares. I don't even know if the Sixth Man of the Year ballot is 3 or 5 spots, but like no one cares about the balloting of those awards. They only care who win them. And Ty Jerome is having a classic most improved player season. He's not even going to be anywhere on the ballot, and that sucks to me.
Yeah, and he's also in conversation for 50, 40, 90, right? And the most important thing for him is hitting his free throws at the end of the season and getting to the free throw line, which we know he might, because that's a guy that likes to get into the interior, as Jimmy mentioned, maybe not all the way to the rim, but he's going to draw contact and get what he needs. And I just pulled this up, right, Jimmy? The total stats, the total points for Ty Jerome this season, 816. The most he had ever scored in a season was in his second year in the NBA, first season with OKC, when he scored 353 points. That's almost doubled. That's more than doubled at this point in the season already for Ty. And that's also, as you mentioned, injuries and all these things. But I just think when you talk about a player that deserves to be in a conversation, Ty Jerome's name needs to be at the top of that list. But going into the last portion of today's podcast, and we talked a little bit about this beforehand when it comes to Victor Wembanyama and his injury. Jimmy, there's blood clot issues going around the NBA this season. It's not just Victor. It's been Chris Bosh. It was now the most recent is Damian Lillard, who had a calf injury and found a blood clot in there. So he's out indefinitely. One, what do you think about this significant injury, some that has ruined NBA careers in the past, but also just in very close terms, how it could impact the playoffs if Damian Lillard is not able to return for the Milwaukee Bucks? Because as we mentioned, they got a potential matchup with the New York Knicks, and then if they get out of that, which I don't know if they do, if they don't have Dame, they would have to play the Boston Celtics. So what do you think about the injury? What do you think about its impact and the significance because of how deep the blood clots can get for a player, and not only his NBA career, but his lifestyle?
First of all, I just want to say injuries suck. Health issues suck. And these are scary situations that we're dealing with. Chris Bosh had to retire because of I believe Chris Bosh also had blood clot in his lungs at the time. So again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not saying that what Dame is going through and what Victor is going through are the same as what Chris Bosh is going through. I don't know that. I don't know anything about that. I just this is a moment to say on a basketball podcast that life is precious. Go to the doctor, get checked out, all that sort of stuff. Make sure you're okay, because you never know what they're going to find in there, and the earlier you catch stuff, the better it is. Okay, that's just public service announcement. As it pertains to the basketball, we've already talked about the Bucks being low on guys who can dribble. Now it's just Giannis and the Giannettes over there. I just feel like, man, that franchise has had some really bad injury luck the last couple of years, from Middleton missing that Celtics series, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, to Giannis getting hurt in back-to-back playoff series. Now Dame is going to miss the rest of the season with this. Like, I assume as much. I think they set out indefinitely, but usually, I mean, Victor's out for the rest of the season. I assume Dame's going to be the same way. I don't want to put words in people's mouth. I just think the Bucks are dead in the water now at this point, man. Like, if you're Giannis is one of my favorite players in the league when measuring competitive fire. He's the true Mamba mentality successor. I feel like we have a lot of people talking the talk. Giannis walks the walk. That guy gives everything he has on the court for 40 minutes every single night. He's going to need to do it for 45 in the playoffs for them to even win one round. But yeah, if the Bucks were already teetering out of I would say they were probably already out of my picture of teams that can win 2 playoff rounds. Now this is just a sad situation where we're going to watch Giannis. Teams are going to, you want to talk about building the wall for Giannis? We're going to see some of the strongest defensive walls ever built, and these teams are going to dare your Kyle Kuzmas, your Torian Princes, I mean, we're going to see more Kevin Porter Jr. now with no Dame. They're going to be daring these guys to beat them, and I just don't think they can. So this is maybe, I mean, taking Dame off the court can build some stronger defensive lineups because teams were going to go after Dame in the playoffs. Maybe that's something that the Bucks can work with, but offensively, and Giannis is going to have to sit at some point in these games. They're just dead in the water now when that happens. And when Giannis is out there, I mean, I'm going to want to watch him because he's going to be putting on some heroic performances. He's going to be putting up some crazy stat lines. He's going to be playing with his hair on fire. But it's just, man, that's such a brutal gut punch for a franchise. I mean, you think when the Bucks win this championship back in, I believe it was 2021, it really felt like they were set up for a long run here. And they had the Middleton injury. They reached this point where, again, remember, they had Giannis. The big three then was Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, featuring Brook Lopez as like this defensive player of the year type guy at the rim. And they reached this point where, man, I just don't think we have, as good as our defense is, our offense gets stuck in the mud a little bit too much in the playoffs. So we need to inject a more dynamic player into our. So they made the sacrifice. Okay, Drew Holiday, certified playoff dude, not incredible on ball defender. Had a couple of iconic defensive plays during their championship run. That was such a fun run. They were a great team, such a very fun team. That I feel like the Suns Bucks finals, like a sleeper fun finals where they had like the Giannis 50-point game that sealed it. The Drew, I think it was Drew to Giannis alley-oop that sealed one of those games. I don't know if it was game 6 or not, but sealed one of those games. And it was just like, Drew, why are you throwing this pass? Like, you should be winding the clock down. And Drew's like, no, we're going for it. And Giannis is going to throw this down, get an and one. It was so cool. They also had the DeAndre Ayton, like, at the buzzer tap in during that series, which was crazy. That was just a really fun, and there's a lot of stakes because it's like Chris Paul has never won a title, Giannis has never won a title, legacy stuff at stake. It's underrated, fun series. But anyways, the Bucks, that team worked, but then over the next couple of years, again, in part due to injuries, they looked at it and they were like, we just need a little bit more creation around Giannis. So they made this calculated decision. Drew Holiday, incredible defensive player who leaves a little bit to be desired on offense sometimes when there's no Middleton out there and he's your second guy. Even at times when he's your third guy and you need him, because Giannis is unique in that he's a great player, but he's not the guy you just give the ball to at the end of the games and say, okay, pick and roll, here we go. So sometimes that needs to be Drew and Chris to help Giannis get into offense. And again, in those moments, Drew leaves a little bit to be desired. So they traded Drew for Dame, essentially, as core pieces. The trade was more complicated than that, but drew for Dame and hired Adrian Griffin as their coach as well. After firing Bud, I think they'd probably want that one back, given where they are now. And it hasn't worked, and it's hard to. I guess it's hard to say that, right? Because again, Giannis was hurt last year, and now Dame is hurt this year. So results-wise, it hasn't worked, and that's frustrating. But what's more frustrating about it is that they haven't really gotten to see what it would look like. They haven't gotten to see their vision executed, and that's gotta be, if you're the Bucks front office, that's gotta eat at you. But I went long there. But in terms of what it means for this year, they're cooked.
Jimmy giving the Milwaukee Bucks history. I love it, man. I love it. Tapped into everything in the NBA, ball knower. But Jimmy, I know this team and this playoffs means a lot to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I can only imagine, based on the significance, the emotional toll that took on this team when they had to trade away George Niang and Karis LeVert during the trade deadline to get and acquire DeAndre Hunter. The possibility for them to play the Atlanta Hawks in the playoffs still looms, as they are the 7th seed currently. And if they lose to the Orlando Magic and then they beat between whoever comes out of the Chicago Bulls, Miami Heat, this is talking about what is the bracket currently. I just think that would be an emotionally told series, but obviously these are grown men and they've moved on and been able to help their teams to certain points of the season. But I still don't think Trae Young is going to be able to pull his team without Jalen Johnson to the promised land. Obviously, Dyson Daniels has been incredible defensively this season. And we know what Karis and George can bring. And Zachary Ricochet is a guy also vying for the Rookie of the Year this season. But it's to a different standard and to a different playoff experience for the Cavs. And that's why they traded away those guys. So I think still the most interesting series would be for the Cavs, for them to go through the Orlando Magic, then the Detroit Pistons, and then the Boston Celtics to get to the NBA Finals. That would be what I would hope to see to happen for this team. Obviously, Indiana is. Go ahead.
Yeah, to your point about, yes, I think that's what most Cavs fans want to see, that path. But not just because of the storylines, which would be fun for us and for the fans, I think, but also I think that's the easiest path, frankly, as I alluded to at the top. And I do wonder, we're having these conversations. By the way, I did just do a quick Google. The DeAndre Ayton tip-in buzzer was in the Western Conference Finals of that playoff run, not the finals. I'm just like, when I'm stream of consciousness going through my half bubble, that was like 2021, the half bubble playoffs. I just got my wires crossed a little bit there. Anywho, we've been having these conversations, and this is what happened when you basically all but lock up the number 1 seed before with 15, 20 games left of the season. We have to find things to worry about for the Cavs. And one of the talking points that has arisen has been, man, this team hasn't faced a lot of adversity, right? Like, what happens when they, what if they eat a real, like, slobberknocker playoff punch, or like take a real bit of adversity for the first time in the playoffs? That's tough. And you could argue that this little 4-game losing streak, I shouldn't call it little. I don't want to patronize the losing streak. It's a 4-game losing streak. I'm sure that took its toll on the team on the road in the West, during the West Coast road trip. But I still think that on the path to Boston, where there will be real adversity, I do think you want more of a test in one of those first 2 playoff rounds. So I wonder, while I think everyone wants to see JB coaching against the Cavs in the playoffs, probably including JB, he's chomping at the bit to get some fulcrum of revenge there. I just think Cavs fans should be rooting to see the Pacers, because the Pacers will challenge the Cavs, and no one's Boston, but the way that their process works on offense, where they're trying to shoot as many threes as possible, and how they can hit you from a few different creative outlets, like Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nemhard. They run stuff through Miles Turner. They're just more of a diversified offense than Detroit is. Maybe Detroit, and there's Detroit with the way Cade Cunningham's going to attack mismatches. That's Boston-y too. So there's something to be learned either way. I'm just saying, I think the Pacers can get a game or two off the Cavs. I'm not sure I feel that way about the Pistons, and I'm not sure you want the Cavs to be. Maybe you do. I'm not sure that if I'm a Cavs fan, I would want the Cavs to be strolling into Boston with like an 8-1 playoff record, and then Boston, game one of the Boston Garden, the Cavs have a bad shooting night, then they lose by 23. That's just harder to recover from when that's the first instance of adversity you've seen in the playoffs, in my opinion. Again, as I said before, we're poking holes in a team that doesn't have very many holes right now. We're trying to poke holes, but there might be a little credence to that one. If there is, then you probably want to see the Pacers in round 2 instead of Detroit.
To be completely honest, I knock on wood, injuries suck. We don't wish injuries upon anybody in the entire NBA, MLB, whatever, across sports. But the Pistons and the Orlando Magic might be the two most physical teams that the Cavs could face in the first 2 rounds, right? So that could be a test for them going into the Boston Celtics series to see where they're at, not only like dealing with the wear and tear of going against two of the most physical teams in the playoffs, but also like, do they have to go through injuries again? Again, that was the biggest portion of last year's playoffs for the Cavs, is they were not fully healthy. They didn't have one of their core 4 members for the Eastern Conference semifinals. Sure, we don't know what Jared Allen would have necessarily done. We don't know what Dean Wade would have necessarily done before coming back in that series. So I think that's important to note, is that injuries happen, but they are also so significant to how a team can outlook their season. But Jimmy, I want to wrap up and get out of here, but I have to ask you about this before we get out of here to do so. Jimmy, this is one of the most important days in sports because of everything that is happening around the world. I'm not necessarily talking about the NBA as a whole, but I'm talking about just in general. There's 14 MLB games going on because it is Major League Baseball's opening day. The Sweet 16, there's 4 games going on today. And there are 18 combined NBA and NHL games. Are you going to get to enjoy the sports dynamic on your TV this afternoon before we have to be at Rocket Arena to cover the Cavs versus Spurs game tonight?
I'm going to try, man. This is almost like stimulation overload at this point. Opening day in baseball is fun. If I'm ranking my priorities, first of all, hockey's at the bottom. Not a hockey guy. Don't fault you if you are. I just already have, because we have this job in particular, I already dedicate so much of my brain space to sports stuff that I just, at this point in my life, I don't know that I have it in me to welcome a new sport and all of its lexicon. Because I'm not going to be like, I think baseball is my casual sport. That's like, I always joke that the baseball plays 162 game preseason, and then the season starts in October. Sorry if that offends you if you're a baseball fan. That's kind of how it works. We get how many times, like the Dodgers last year were the best team. They won the World Series. Other than that, how many times in recent years have we gotten the best team win the World Series? Not very often. That kind of sucks. Whatever. Too much randomness in your playoffs. I think that hockey, I can't fit into my brain waves at this point. I don't have enough space for it. I will try to watch the March Madness as we sit here. I'm going to say this, by the time we record again, my bracket will probably be cooked. Right now I am cooking. I'm in the running to win a few pools. Obviously I'll be at Cavs Spurs tonight, so I'll probably miss most of the NBA action, but it is a beautiful time to be a sports fan with all the streaming and cable options that we have to watch. Although to the Guardians' point and to some of the Cavs' points, it's a little harder to watch some of these games than it used to be. I digress. It's fun though. I think between March and October, depending on if you're a football or a baseball person, 2 best times to be engrossed in sports.
Especially with the draft incoming. And Jimmy, we know that you also cover the Browns for cleveland.com and have your pulse on Ohio State and everywhere else. And so I appreciate you making the time to come and talk to me today. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions if you want a shout out on the podcast and to get them answered when we talk about this season and how the Cavs are leading into the playoffs. To do so, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.